You're listening to the Reframing Ministries podcast, providing strength for today and hope for tomorrow for caregivers and their families. Connect with Colleen and other caregivers on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, where you can find a community of people who get it and explore all our resources. Now, here's Colleen.
Bob, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Colleen.
You and your wife were married 24, 25 years ago. I think that's what you had said. And
Yep.
She is a nurse, and you had a technology major background. But then the Lord kind of led you in another direction. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, my wife and I, we've been married 24 years this March, and our first child, when we were expecting, we really had a lot of surprises, and God had a lot of surprises in store for us. And at 7 months, my wife basically went into labor, and he was born 2 months premature, which started us on a road that, no one can imagine unless you've been through it yourself. Each family is so unique, but just the road that God put us on just changed our lives forever, and really started us down a path of a greater understanding, I think, of who we were in Him, but really just a lot of excitement, right? We'd call it excitement, wouldn't we?
Maybe at church, but you know what? There are a lot of times we call it stress, and we call it, I didn't expect this, and we call it surprises, and then we call upon the Lord to fix the mess that we make of things when we try to fix it ourselves. So it's a little bit of everything in there. But was he your first, or?
Yes, Kyle was our first, and it's just really it started us on just a crazy path. We have 3 children. The interesting thing, and the way the Lord works is just so funny to me, because he was 2 months premature, and he ended up, over years of, we didn't get a diagnosis day one. We brought him home after a month and all those things. But when we decided to have a second child, he was also 2 months premature. And so, even all the doctors, all the, high-risk pregnancy people that we were around and everything, we still had, our second son premature at 2 months. And yet he does not have cerebral palsy, and our oldest does. And we look at those two situations, and many of us would say, what's different here? That you have 2 children, both born, under stressful situations, yet God, allowed one to have cerebral palsy and one does not. Why? I mean, that to me is what I always kind of go back to. I am a why kind of guy, I guess you'd say, and I always wondered why, when we see 2 situations identical, does one go one way and one go the other? And it really, comes back to me that it is God, not us. I mean, I literally have no control over these situations, and neither did the doctors. I mean, we went to these people who were supposed to help us with this high-risk pregnancy thing. They were supposed to know all this stuff, and yet here we were in the same exact situation with our second son. And it is amazing that God had a plan. It was not our plan, but we can look back and say it has been good.
Well, that's very interesting, Bob. So you did not you've said so many things. I have a million questions, but you spent a month probably in the NICU, and then you were able to bring him home, and there was a delay in development, but you kind of probably thought, well, that's just because he was born early, and never forget that medicine is a practice. It is not the end all, but it is definitely what we need at the same time.
Right.
Tell me about what I call D-Day, or diagnosis day, when you finally had a doctor look at you and say, your son has cerebral palsy.
Well, again, you're right. So we take him home after a month, and he's got a monitor on that goes off in the middle of the night. And we think it's a heart monitor, and we think we leap out of bed because these things scream, and but we go up to it, and it turns out the belt had spun around on him, and things like that. He really didn't have any episodes, but still, we had plenty of episodes.
Well, sure. Sleep is so overrated, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't get any sleep at all when you're a young parent.
Yeah. Well, and what really happened for us was that at 6 months, so the doctor said, yeah, he's, because he's 2 months preemie, he's behind, he'll catch up, right? That's what they keep telling you. But at 6 months, he was born at Stanford Hospital, and they had a program where they wanted to bring in children who were in the ICU back to do an evaluation. It was probably, I was thinking back on this, it was probably some grad students program to follow up on kids who were in the NICU and progress and things. So what happened was we went back, and they did an examination of our son, and they didn't really give us a diagnosis, but they said, we think you need to go see a specialist. There are things that he's doing that we don't think are right. And one of the things that is, so obvious to me now, 22 years later, but when we picked him up, his legs would cross immediately. He would scissor, and his toes pointed straight down, which is a telltale sign. But of course, as new parents, we were clueless.
Well, of course. Well, you don't expect it. You don't read on cerebral palsy or on any of those things when you're reading what to expect when you're expecting.
You're right. Yeah, that's not a chapter, I've noticed. But so we went to the specialist. He did a thorough examination of our son, and my wife laughs at this because my affectionate name for that doctor is Dr. Death. And the reason is because everything that he told us, he gave us a laundry list of things that were potentially wrong with our son. He just, his bedside manner was pretty much matter of fact, and he just told us, a list of hydrocephalus, cerebral palsy, and the list went on, and really, that was the moment for me when it really, my jaw hit the floor, and I walked away from there just with such a numb, just glazed over feeling of something's wrong with my child, and that really was what started us on the journey at that point of really starting to figure out what was going on and what we could do to help our son, excel.
I want to ask you, well, I don't think you probably went back to that physician since you had other physicians to see. How did your wife respond? Were you together at the time?
Yeah, we were both there. I think, the problem is, and this is probably part of the, just who I am. I don't remember her reaction because I was just so dumbfounded. I just don't think I remember what was going on other than walking out of there just overwhelmed.
My brother's a cancer survivor, but he told me, because I asked him a question, what was it like when you exited the doctor's office and looked down that long hallway that is usually painted white or near white? What was that like? And he said almost the exact same thing. I was numb, and I don't remember really anything else. It was almost surreal. And you wrote that, well, what we want to talk about too is what we're going to get to, and I don't know if you can see this, but you put together this for dads, 3 things. I don't know if you can see this on camera or not, but yeah, you can see it. There's your little booklet. Now you probably have a better one. Okay. Yours is way better, but mine is also marked up. But you wrote 3 things I wish someone would have told me. And in that, you do talk about the feelings. And for you as a man to be able to identify feelings that you wrote, bewildered, confused, distressed, semi-numb, helpless. How did you start to identify those things? And how can people identify their feelings in the midst of this trauma?
I have now 22 years. This is 22 years ago that I'm talking about at this time, and really it didn't happen overnight. It really is a process that we go through where, we start to deal with it and probably process it as we can. God is gracious, and he doesn't, just dump it all on us at once. And I used an analogy that a friend of mine gave me, and he talked about a glass of water, where if you've got a glass of water, we all have a personal stress level just in general, right? So some of us, our glass is already half full all the time with just life. Some of us tend to be tight and worrisome. Some of us have a nature, I'm the youngest kid of three, and I probably have a lot less personal stress than, say, my brother, who was the oldest, who was more, that some of it is, some people talk about that birth position as something. As a kid, I laughed because I was the one who got the toy out of the cereal box, whether I found it in the cereal box or not, because all I did was go, "Oh," my mom would say, "Give it to your baby brother." I know it's terrible, right? But so my stress level was maybe lower, but if you take a pitcher of water to that glass, that whatever level it is, and you start filling it, at some point it overfills. For some, it overfills sooner than others, and also we empty it at different times, right? I mean, we ebb and flow. We're able to process some of those things at different times. And for me, it really has been a process. Could I have written this thing about 3 things at that time? Absolutely not. I mean, it just wouldn't have happened. And literally, the things that are in here are the things that over the years that I have wrestled with, and the things that I have thought through and prayed through to try and just understand. Because I think sometimes C.S. Lewis has a great comment. He says that a lot of times we don't necessarily want a father God, we want a grandfather God.
Oh, yes, I think that's a grief observed. I just read that the other day.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, and he talks about how we want somebody who's kindly and doesn't pay attention when we're bad, and pats us on the head and loves us, right? But doesn't really deal with us in the way we need to be dealt with, and doesn't want the best for us in times where we need things to we need to be corrected. So God had to allow me to process through those things to get to the point where he could tell me the things he needed to tell me about it. And that didn't happen in year one. That, some of these have been a process over the years. And literally, it's funny because I probably wrote the first 2 of these things probably a year before I wrote the 3rd one. And the reason is because I really had to spend a lot of time processing specifically the 3rd point, which is on faith. I mean, I really had to really think through where my faith was and what it took me to continue to believe all these years that God is good and that he's good all the time.
Yes. Have you read Philip's book, Your God is Too Small? I've referred to it several times, but he talks about the different kinds of God that the caricatures that we have of God. He's the grandfather God, or he's the policeman God, and it usually takes a trauma or some kind of event like this, or a loss on a grand scale, for us to then go, who are you really, God? Because I like that grandfather one better, because I didn't have any pain then. But there's nothing in Scripture that says we're going to be without pain. So here you are in the midst of raising this child who is so very, very different, and you and your wife are processing things probably, I would assume, differently. Norm Wright has a great book, and it's, I don't know, I've read it so much that it doesn't have a cover, but it's Crisis and Trauma Counseling. And he even talks about the different processes in the neurological functions of the brain of men and women, not only just on a typical scale, but then when we're stressed. Right. How did you both work through that?
Well, I mean, I think, and really the point 1 in here is, in that shock and awe, you really have to give each other grace. It's so hard to be on the same page at the same time for all of us. I mean, just to be able to take the time to say, you know what, I'm struggling, and at different times my wife would be struggling and I would be struggling, and it didn't seem like we were at the same. It was almost like, we would pass and then be at the same and then pass, and we had to have enough grace for each other and enough understanding that we had to be able to go through this, each one of us go through it to be able to make it make it this far. And I can't say that it's always easy. It hasn't been, but my wife and I, fortunately, I'd say, both had an understanding that we made an agreement with each other that we were married, and that meant we were together, and that we had to, that you were still going to see this person tomorrow, so you better work on it.
In fact, tonight.
Yeah.
Did you see a counselor? Was that part of your process?
We did at one point.
That's great.
Us, we and it at times, it was what we needed at that time, and then we stopped going because it did help us make it through that period where we were struggling.
I think most often, Bob, people the wife wants her husband to be more like her, and the husband wants her to grieve like him, and that's absolutely impossible. And then the church kind of has an agenda for how we grieve. In fact, in Norm Wright's book, I just found this, and I have to put on my granny glasses so I can see. But what he says is about grief and loss and getting through traumas. He says, as a culture, we seem to have an intolerance for suffering. We tend to want those who have experienced a loss of any kind to get on with their lives as quickly as possible, often by minimizing the impact of significant losses, pathologizing those whose reactions are intense, and applauding those who seem relatively unaffected by tragic events. People may say things like, she must not have been a good wife for him she must not have been a good wife for him to leave her. They failed as parents, otherwise that child would have stayed in the church and wouldn't have been involved in all that other stuff. Or he lost his job. I wonder what he did wrong. I mean, we assume, he goes on, I can
Right.
You could give me a laundry list.
Right.
But we assume that if we're crying 10 years after you've had a diagnosis, something's wrong with the parent or with the person who's lost or who's grieving. And yet that assumption is terribly, terribly judgmental.
Right.
So how did you deal with the judgments? In Texas, you got a big gun. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. It's funny because, and I'm not going to tell you anything you haven't heard, but at one point, I was in church and a sweet, sweet lady. She had no malice whatsoever, but she came up to me and said, you must be really special for God to have given you this child, right? And I see you drop because you've heard it. We've heard it. And the only thing I could think of in my brain is, God, don't help me not kick this woman.
I love your honesty. And they mean so well, but it's like, no, if you only knew how weak and how much I have no clue what I'm doing.
And it's been, there are moments, I can't, I've talked about this, it's been 22 years, but there are still moments where something will happen, where it will just hit me like a ton of bricks. Along the way, there are so many events where, my son turned 16 and we worked on getting him a driver's license and tried to get him to be able to drive. But, we've worked and it just, so far it just hasn't happened. And that, there are moments where it's like that something will happen and I'll say, well, he can't drive himself, and it will just break my heart, right? I mean, I will grieve in that moment for a loss. And that's it's not the original diagnosis loss. It's not the loss, at the time of him going to grade school or, getting his first wheelchair or him not being included in a program because he couldn't, because he wasn't able to. Those were different moments, and those things flush over me and make me feel, a sadness for those moments. And I grieve over those moments, and that will be probably for a lifetime.
Yes.
It's just what I will go through and my wife will go through at different times. It is the situation. So to say, and for people to say, oh, they've gotten over it, or to get over it, you can't expect people to ever completely get over those traumatic losses or those events. But after time, I think we understand them more. We give ourselves patience to go through that process and then be able to come out of it and maybe even gain a little more understanding of where we are and where our relationship with God is through those times.
Right. I have a funny quote on this as well from a great writer. She writes, "Culture has really lied to us. You really don't get over the biggest losses in your life. You don't pass through grief in any organized way." I wanted an exclamation point. "And it takes years and infinitely more tears than people want to allot you. Yet the gift of grief is incalculable in giving you back yourself." And I would have to add to that, and giving us a perspective of God that is unfathomable, because it's so different than that small belief we used to have. So over the years, tell me how you have discovered God as your Father.
I think probably I grew up, and it's funny because I grew up in I'd say a religious home, somewhat religious home, but not really having a faith that God was a personal God. I had a giant God, very solemn, very organized, very structured God. And if I did certain things, I was okay with God. That was what, my mindset. Even the school that I went to, we were required to go to church, before school started for my first elementary years. But when I became a young man and was out on my own at 18, I really stopped going to church because it's funny, I never stopped believing in God, but I just didn't have him as really a part of my life. He was there, and I don't think I ever thought he wasn't there, but it didn't affect my daily life. And it's interesting because I really kind of went off the rails. I joke with my friends and say, there were things that were BC.
I love that.
Yeah, and for me, BC, but
you want to go into any of that, Bob? Or are you okay with just that right there?
We're going to move on from that. This is a family program, but anyway. In my early 20s, I had a cousin who was very close to me that I worked with at a place. And one morning I got a call from my father that my cousin had been hit by a drunk driver and had been killed that night. And I had literally seen him the day before. And it really put me on a path to really recognizing as a young man that we aren't invincible as some of us think as an early 20s, and it really made me start thinking about, well, what do I believe? What happens to us? Where do we go? What are the things that happen? And it really, in my early 20s, I remember sitting down in a beach in Santa Cruz, California, and saying, God, I can't do it on my own anymore. I just can't. I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no clue. And that was, that event really changed the course of my life. And now, as a young parent, to have a situation like this where not just one child, but multiple children, and our daughter, we had a lot of fun with our third child, who's our daughter. Although she went full term, my wife was on bed rest for 6 months, and we just, I don't know if we were gluttons for punishment or what, but God has really stretched me far beyond what I ever thought I could be stretched, and has made me think about things that I never would have thought about, or contemplated things, or even recognized that, I have shaken my fist at God and said, people, and I'm sorry to call them stupid people, have a perfectly healthy child and throw it in the trash or in a dumpster. And I, a loving parent who wants the best for my children, have a child with a disability and all these struggles. And I say, how is that fair, right? I've had to deal with, how is that fair? How does this make sense, right? And deal with the guilt of, well, okay, I didn't become a Christian until I was in my early 20s. Maybe this is payback for all those BC years that I really didn't follow the Lord or do things the way I should have, I mean, I had to process through those things, through the, it's funny, I don't really believe in karma, but yet here I was thinking, well, there's payback for what I've done, but really processing through that God says, no, there is a reason. God has a reason. There are reasons for the things we go through, and they are to point us to God. I mean, there is no other. God's agenda is to point us towards God, to have us understand who He is in this life, however brief it may be, is to point us towards our Creator in all things, and to be able to process that, to be able to start turning that and say, but I hate that. I hate that those things. I hate that these things are going on. I hate that this. But to understand, when my son was 7, I started working at Focus on the Family, and my son we got introduced to Dr. James Thompson, who's just been a wonderful mentor to me. But he put my son on a broadcast, and he interviewed him and talked to my son about. And at 7 years old, my son got to be on the radio broadcast, and he got to talk about, and one of the most poignant questions is he asked Dr. Dobson, how could God use a boy with cerebral palsy? And Dr. Dobson just got to answer him. And you know what was amazing to me is, it broke my heart to hear my son say that. But in the months that followed, we received so many letters from people who God used what my son said on the radio to bless them and to help them work through the issues in their own life. And I say, would my son at 7 years old have that kind of impact on the thousands of letters we got? We got a letter about a person who pulled over to the side of the road and gave their life to Christ because of my 7-year-old. And to think, how would that have ever happened if God had not been orchestrating all these things to point us to Him? It wouldn't have happened. And that really has been the greatest thing that God has shown me, not only there, and then at 13, my son got to be a part of the Truth Project with Dr. Del Tackett.
Yes.
And really got to be able to speak to people and speak to who God is in a powerful way. And we, again, receive feedback from people that say, my gosh, your 13-year-old is just so amazing. And I just think, only by the grace of God, not anything I've done.
Yeah.
Clearly, people say, "Oh, you're such a wonderful parent to have this child," and I say, "That's funny. It is by God and God alone that He has given my son those words of wisdom. It has been God's words, not mine. And even my son will admit it's not his. God has been gracious to us and has given us a little glimpse of what He's doing to use us to point people and ourselves to Him. And we've been so grateful. And that's why we really feel called to help to share with others what God has done in our lives, because He has given us that glimpse where many don't feel that they've gotten that glimpse.
Well, I want to say, isn't it funny how when our kids behave well, or according to society or the church, when they have, that passable behavior, that, oh, what super parents. But then when they behave badly, you go, uh-oh, what do we do with that? I just got a demotion.
Yeah.
When actually it is all God. It is all of Him. Now, go back with me, because how did Dr. Dobson answer that question when your son was 7? How can God use a guy like me with cerebral palsy?
Well, to paraphrase, basically he sent him straight to God's word, where that we can do all things through Christ.
Yeah.
And really that has been, that has been the most helpful understanding for us, and the verse to cling to, because it just doesn't make sense a lot of times. Why or how things are going to work themselves out. I mean, from Kyle being born through the 12 different surgeries he's had to try and, help him be able to do things that he couldn't do through the years, the pains and struggles, where most kids were spending their summers maybe at camp. My son was on the couch with casts on his legs and having surgeries to lengthen his heel cords and they rotated his legs 20 degrees and
Oh my gosh.
yeah. He had swing set hardware put into his knees so that his knees would work, and just all of those things that my son has had to go through, but God has used those times for him to be able to be more contemplative, for him to spend time and really be able to use the gifts that he's given him. He's so smart, and God has given him a brain to be able to think through things where maybe, he wouldn't have been able to had he not had those times where he's really stuck with the only thing to do is read and pray and contemplate. So, God has used his skills as he has seen fit, and he uses all of us, I think, as he sees fit. And to be okay with that, I think, is one place that we have to get to as parents, to say, this is where God has us, and I'm okay with that.
Okay. Yeah. This is where God has us, and I'm okay with that. Sometimes is the Grand Canyon in between.
Oh, amen.
I mean, seriously. And so I want you to address, how did you not get stuck in that place of feeling sorry for yourself, or this isn't fair, or all the things that we think we have a right to in life, which is an answer to our questions and fairness, and we don't have a right to those things, but we have to get to the other side. How did you do that?
Again, it wasn't an overnight click, and it happened. Really what it has been is I think that the biggest thing for me, and I thank God for this, is that I have always had the question of why. And I have never left that question out of my mind in all things. I have looked for a reason, and I have not given up on that. I don't. I'm pretty stubborn, and I have not let myself be reserved to a place that I feel I've arrived or that I want to sit still. I have never been able to do that. I just can't. To see when I have worked with our son, and we've been very blessed that he has been able to be a part of our regular Sunday school class, and we've been able to include him in those things. But we saw other parents who were not able to, and so we started a Sunday school program in our church 15 years ago to address that. And it wasn't because my son needed that program. He had a buddy system. He was able to be a part of the regular program, but there weren't buddies for every kid, and not every kid fit into the buddy program. And so we decided we were going to do this, and we set up a room and started doing it. And I didn't, the greatest thing that one of the pastors said to me, and when I went to him, I said, this is not right. There's children trying to come to this church, and families who are coming who are leaving because there's no place for their kids. And he was very honest with me, and he said, Bob, the pastors all have responsibilities, way more than they can fulfill already. Nobody's going to take this on. And I looked at him kind of taken aback, and I said, I wasn't asking for a pastor. I was asking for a room.
I love that, because how many pastors ever hear that? Like Zippo, most of the time, it's
right.
Who's going to head this program up for me?
Well, and I think we have to, as parents, to help our children be successful, even at school. Those IEPs and all the craziness that goes on with the schools and all these programs. How do we get our kids in the best place they possibly can be? We have to be forceful. We have to be their advocate. We have to step forward and say, this needs to be fixed, and this needs to be right, and this is what to the best of our ability. Again, not being overly aggressive, because those IEPs can get kind of ugly sometimes. But
really,
I know. I always joke, if you're bringing a lawyer, you've gone too far. But anyway.
And I probably was the cause of a lot of the ugliness and the IEPs that we've had as I look back. So I don't say that negatively just on the teacher side. I say that as it's a broken system trying to help broken people, and we do the best we can.
Right. But, and I've been in a room where I said, really? That's your answer? Really? But, to all that to say, I have never been satisfied with where I am now and the answer I have now. And I don't think we can be in our lives in general, regardless of our situation. I don't think God wants us to stay still and to sit back. Now, does that mean that all the time I've been just, pressing and my head forward? No, I mean, there have had to be times of rest. There have been times where I have felt so distant from God and just exhausted from trying to figure it all out, and just had to say, I have to put this aside for now and come back to it. But in the times when I'm ready and I'm able to digest and work through the things that God is working through with me, I have really tried to understand what He's doing, and really, have I arrived, and do I feel like I understand it? Absolutely not. But I can look back 22 years now. I can look back and say, I have seen the hand of God. I have seen His movement, and now, watching my son, my oldest son, graduate with a 4-year degree from Patrick Henry College.
Wow.
And say, would I have ever have expected that to happen? And the answer is absolutely not. But has God been so good to help us figure it all out? He absolutely, positively has. And I can say He is good by looking back and seeing His hand in those things that he has moved to make this all happen. And it's a great thing.
Yeah, isn't perspective wonderful?
It is.
I tell my kids, I'm sorry, I tried out for the first time as a parent, and I can't come back and reparent. So I'm sorry, because I know I made a lot of mistakes. But in that gaining of perspective, you also put together the booklet, and you had the 3 things that you wish you would have known. One, you addressed the feelings. The second was in the husband-wife relationship, to let each other be. And, you were kind of the fix-it guy. If I have a hammer, there's going to be a nail somewhere, and you had to learn, well, not everything is a nail, even though sometimes I want it to be a nail. Yeah. But what is the third point that you made that you wish you would have known?
I think, and this is the one that took me the longest to really be able to think through and really pray through, and it really is that our faith is so important. I use an example that this young man who's in our special friends class, I really love our friends because they are not, they don't always have what I'd say how would you say, I'm going to screw that up, but
no, you're not. Go ahead. Throw it out there.
they aren't bound by our social norms in a lot of cases, and they will say exactly what's on their mind.
Oh my gosh, that's my son. Yeah.
And that's, that's so fantastic. And so, I love that. I absolutely love that when they ask a straightforward question. And one of our friends, I'm doing the Bible story, I've got the Bible story out there, and I'm talking about Jesus. And he says, well, why do we worship Jesus who we can't see? Wouldn't it just be easier to worship a stick? We can see the stick. And, what an honest question. What an absolutely honest question. And to say that we haven't said that to ourselves a million times. I've been trying to read through the Bible in a year, and I've been reading through the Old Testament and reading how time and time again Israel sets up an Asher pole or goes and builds some gods instead of worshiping the God who time and time again saved them and destroyed their enemies and all these things. And I just think, why do you keep doing that? Why do you keep doing that? And why do we keep doing that?
Because we're idiots, and He's not. Because we're so broken.
But really, what I've learned over these 22 years is, who else can I go to and say, God, it doesn't make sense. Is a stick or a golden idol or, going out and making a ton of money, did that answer my questions? Would that answer my questions? No. And did I get all my answers? That's also a no. But God has been faithful to help me understand what I can understand as we've gone along. Could I understand the whole picture? This side of heaven, I have to agree. No, I'm too hard-headed to really understand that in the long run. But God has been gracious to help me understand what I can understand along the way. And there is nothing else but faith in Christ who can help us do that, help us process through these things.
Okay, so I want to ask you this because there are people listening or watching that are saying, I'm going to choose the stick because I hate what is going on in my life, and I've trusted Christ, and it's not gotten better. It's gotten a whole lot worse. And as you said earlier, things did get worse for you guys. And we don't expect that of a good God. So for someone who maybe is stuck right now and they're really bitter or they're mad or they did everything right and then everything wrong happened or something unjust has come along, and to say it's faith, give me some nuts and bolts on that.
Well,
like for me, it was sometimes screaming in my car. You know, that's kind of one of those, I'm having it out with you now, right now, Lord, because I don't get this at all.
Well, and I think a lot of times, like you said, our understanding of God, I think sometimes we don't think, and I don't know why, but we don't think we can be honest with God, or that He doesn't know that we're angry with Him. I mean, come on,
right?
If He is the God of the universe who knows everything, how can He not know that I'm mad at Him? How can I not be honest enough? And I think that's really a lot of times what it is. We will not be honest enough, or we're afraid to be honest because of the way we were told or our idea of who God is. Mm-hmm. We shake our fist and say, I'm upset. I am mad. I do not like this. To cry, to bang our fists, to go out and run a marathon because we can't, because we've got so much pent up energy inside of us because of the frustration. Let's be honest. Let's start there. Let's be honest. And I can't say that, that in year 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 that I had a great relationship with God in that time, or even that I've had, there have been times where I have a terrible relationship with my wife. I'm going to tell you a great story here.
Oh, good. Let's hear it.
Okay. So, I'm being a good guy. I go to get my wife a birthday card, and there's one that I see at the store, right? And I think, this is us. This is exactly us. And it's funny because I'm not good at the sappy cards. I'm a guy. I don't do well with that. So I like the funny card, and it looks exactly like us. And I take it home and I give it to my wife, and she opens it and she says, "This is the exact same card you gave me last year." Matter of fact, it's on top of the piano still, you big silly goose. So
I knew that.
I'm like, I look, oops. No, small. Anyway, so I have those. I can't say that I've had a great relationship with God at all times, and I know that I have been so frustrated with God, and there have been times where I am there. I talked with a guy. He had a great comment that he said there have been times when my faith was held by a single thread, and if that thread had cut, I was done. And yet somehow that single thread remained. And really for me, there were times where I said, I'm done. I'm through with this. Mm-hmm. But then when I stop and think about it, it's like, wait, but I still believe in Him. Well, what does that tell me? I can say I don't believe that He's good. I could say that I didn't believe that He had my best interest. I could be mad at Him that He was doing things to me that I didn't agree with. But the problem underlying was that I still believed in Him, in my mind. Not a problem, but it was that I still believed in Him. I didn't get rid of that despite me being angry or upset with the way He operates. So then maybe what I need to do is actually figure out how He operates, not how I think He operates.
Very good point. That is such a good point, because you're saying one is measurable. Like, okay, I'm a great husband. I'm getting my wife this card, and then, oopsie daisy, I got her the same card. Okay, those are all things that we can measure. But I want to say that our faith is not a measurable faith. And there is not a person on earth who will know where my faith is right now, except for Christ as my Heavenly Father. And there's not a person who knows your faith except for you. And honesty is so critical, because without honesty, how can you have intimacy? And it's intimacy with Him. In fact, I don't know if you know Philip Keller, his work, A Shepherd's Look at Psalm 23. I've referred to that a lot in some of my writings. But I also found that he had written something about the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. And he says, and it's interesting, in the Old Testament, God is referred to as Yahweh in a very holy and fearful way almost. But in the Gospels, Jesus refers to his Father, my Father, over 70 times in the Gospels alone. And then he says, and you could have written this, I think. Did you write this? I'm just kidding. But he says, all too often God is viewed as stern or austere or as a judge standing over us with an attitude of disdain or of depreciation. We seem to see him holding his hands like a giant set of scales. And in our bad deeds, we are weighed against the good conduct. But no, God, our Father, is not a distant deity who stands apart, aloof from the trials of man. He is not the one who sits sternly condemning his children. Rather, he looks upon us in compassion and with deep concern. He's moved by the least inclination on our part to resist evil and to do good. And he goes on and lists a whole bunch of characteristics about God that are his love, his forgiveness, his grace, his care. All of those things we must fall back on when we are in those times where we can't understand. Because even at the end of Hebrews 11, as you know, he says, the most faithful did not receive the inheritance that they deserved until they were in heaven. And that is where our hope is.
Right.
It has to be in heaven, or else it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it, this is I think something that, and I don't know if this is unique to man, but the aspect of a loving God that does love us, that doesn't judge us, that doesn't sit with a pair of scales, that doesn't expect me to work towards my salvation. For me, those are things that I've had to work through, because of my own personal understanding of God. I really had, I would consider, a wrong view, and it's not been I finally get it. It has been a process of over the years of saying, you really love me? I mean, I'm a mess. Yeah. Really? You love me? I'm a mess. I've screwed up again and again. You really love me? And there are days that I just don't believe it. And I have to work through that, because it just seems so incredible that someone loves me despite me. That is the part that I will work through probably till the day that God takes me home, is understanding that. And I think for men and women, we both have to deal with that, but I think we come to it maybe in a different way. Men tending to be more work oriented and wanting, like I said, me being a hammer looking for a nail. I just want to be able to pound that nail in and stand there with satisfaction and broad chest and say, I pounded that nail in right there.
Yeah.
And God's proud of me because of that. And it's not that way. And to turn it around to say that the things that I do and the things that I want to do for God are because of what He has done for me, not because it is expected of me to be able to obtain something. That can be a hard thing for us to deal with. And when you talked about that Grand Canyon, it's the same thing. It's you don't, what is it, eating the elephant? How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
We can't expect that God is going to give us a parachute to just jump over that canyon. We have to go into the canyon. We have to walk the path down to the bottom, and then we have to go up the other side. And it's neither one is easy.
I want to end on something in just a minute, but last night I was speaking with my husband about some things that we're working through with my son who has so many different challenges, and we've discovered some new ones, and so now we're back to more and more specialists and more things going on, and we don't know, what's happening, and he struggles, and in those struggles there are times where he's just mad as anything because he's hurting, or he's got to go through another test, and he protests and throws tantrums. But that would never change how much I love my son, because he can't understand all that's happening. But my love for him, in fact, grows deeper. And so I said to my husband, I think that Jesus, we need to see that he is really the first special needs parent, because we are indeed broken and we can't figure ourselves out. And we have specialists that we see, and we try different programs. But the bottom line is, it comes down to God being our Father. And who else would I want to go to but a special needs parent for help with my child? God wants us to go to him because he is so loving and caring for us. As we close, Bob, what are some general principles that you have discovered that would really be beneficial for men to hear? Because a lot of times we focus on special needs moms and all that they do, but I want you to talk to the guys because they're just as involved, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think really that's why I wrote the booklet. First of all, because as I thought about writing a book, I thought men aren't going to read a book. Sorry, I'm just saying.
I didn't say it. You did.
13 chapters. Maybe I'll skim it. No, but really, what I wanted to be able to do was really talk about the big bucket items, and really, we've touched on a few of them, and really, it is what I call that shock and awe moment, and that you've got to be able to process that and be able to grieve and be able to deal with the emotions. Somebody joked one time that if men and women are like a tube of toothpaste, women are like a tube of toothpaste without the lid on. You squeeze them and it comes out at the end, in a nice stream. Guys, the cap's still on and you squeeze it and then it explodes.
No, I've exploded a few times, but I'm still a girl.
Yeah. Generalization, but I think we help women process better, or women are better at sharing with each other a lot of times where men maybe feel like they can't or they don't. And so really understanding what you're going through, you're not the only one. There are other, don't feel isolated. Don't think you're the only one. Your wife is going through it. It may look different, but your wife is going through it as well. And give each other that grace and that ability to process in your own way, and understand she's not doing what she's doing to punish you. Sometimes it may look like she's upset, and I can do this. If my wife's upset, I'm like, what can I fix? What can I fix? I have to hit myself a couple times. Stop trying to fix it. That's not what you're here for. And be able to process yourself. Don't blame your wife for that. Deal with those issues. And then the second one is know that we're gonna screw up. We're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna do some dumb things. I mean, we're under pressure. There are things going on in our lives. We are not gonna deal with them all in the best way. But I think there are some big lies that we need to make sure that we're not telling ourselves. And saying that our family would be better off without us is a lie. I mean, are there things we have to fix? Are there things we need to do better? Are there things we just need to stop doing? Absolutely. But to believe that your family is better off without you is a lie. And we need to not go there. We need to make sure that we are processing within that family, because in the long run, they need you. And there's nothing there that says they are better off without you. And the third thing is, we need to go through that canyon. We need to go through that canyon with God. We need to be, again, angry, frustrated. All of those things are part of it. But we need to come back. There are periods where, I've stepped away and just said, God, I can't think about this right now.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to keep coming back to that, and we need to be relentless in our faith to understand what God is doing in our life, because it is the only way to get past the feeling sorry for ourselves and the idea that somehow there is a vengeful God and or a universe that is just so random that everything is, as our pastor used to say, we're just lucky mud. And unfortunately, I'm an unlucky mud. We've got to get past that, and we've got to see that there is a plan and a purpose that we may not have all the answers to until we see him face to face, but that we need to be working towards that greater understanding, especially that greater understanding of who he is, because that will point us in the right direction of understanding what's going on with us. And those are the things that I wrote. That's what I really want to convey, and that's what we're really trying to do. Is we're trying to get these to dads and in the hands of dads, and we're giving it away on our website to be able to have dads just be able to download it and read through it, and we're really working towards getting these, to those dads who are going through that, because again, and I even say at the beginning, you may not be ready to read this right now, but hang on to it, because I think it will help, as it has even me 22 years later as I wrote it, help me to process through what I've been through and what I'm going through, and be able to understand that there is a plan and it is good.
And putting those two things together can sometimes be hard. And I think there are people that are going to want to get a hold of you because there is a plan. It is a good plan. And Bob, you can encourage them. How can they get a hold of you? Your website, the book?
Yeah, so they can go to our website is needproject.org, NEED project.org, and that's really
I'll have it in the show notes too.
Yeah, we really used the verse that God showed us that there was a need, and he said, if you saw one of those in need, we need to fill. That's why we went with Need Project. People go, why did you use that? We really felt there was a need to speak to that. So needproject.org. They can also contact me directly. It's bob.west@needproject.org. And on our website, there's banners that are go to the page and just download it as a PDF. And we're also trying to work on printed copies. We're working with different groups to be able to get those out to men's events and different things. So we're really trying to take this where God wants it to go.
Bob, thank you so much for your honesty and for your time, and for being so real. We can't go into it. We're out of time, but I absolutely fell off my chair almost laughing when you yelled at your kids. You talked about it in the booklet. You yelled at the kids on the way to church. You were the hammer and getting everyone to church on time. And then your son said, how come everybody here has it all together and we're such a mess? So thank you for letting us in a little bit on your mess, because we are all having messes of all kinds. As we close, again, I'm going to put these in the show notes, how to get a hold of Bob West and how to connect with the Need Project. It's a fabulous organization. I would love for you to connect there. Wives encouraging your husbands, because the booklet really is affirming, and that's what I loved about it as well, Bob. Any last words that you want to say?
Oh, just thank you for having us today, and thank you for what you're doing. We need to all band together to put an arm around all of our friends and all of those families out there that are just like us. I always tell people I haven't got the answers, and I haven't got it figured out. I'm just further along the arc than they are, and really, if I can share with them, the 2 steps further that I am, to help them get to those next 2 steps, then that's really what it's all about.
Yep, that's just fabulous. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day, and I hope that we can continue some other time and talk about Kyle and that he gets his driver's license and all that good stuff. So you'll be in my prayers. I will tell you that for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again.
Enjoyed today's podcast? We'd love to hear how you've been encouraged in our website comments and our podcast reviews. If Reframing Ministries has been helpful in your life walk, we'd be honored to have you partner with us in prayer and in financial support. We operate entirely and only on your generous gifts and donations. Would you consider giving just $10 a month to help caregivers and their families receive resources full of help, hope, and healing? You can partner with us at reframingministries.com/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again for future discussions with Colleen and world influencers. The Reframing Ministries podcast is a production of Insight for Living Ministries.